Welcome to Season 2 of RecLess, the podcast making you smarter and more knowledgeable about the field of parks and recreation. Join hosts Shane Mize, Jay Tryon, and Tom Venniro, three career-long friends from around the country as they dive into the world of parks and recreation with a surprise guest each episode. Laughs, leadership, life. This is RecLess.
What's that shirt say? Shady.
Says shady as PF.
Man, another one that we just will never get, Jay.
Just a slap in the face.
You're never going to see it, ever.
That's okay. You know what? I just like saying the word shady because that makes me think you are very shady.
It's true. And then below it says largest pecan tree in Travis County, because we have the largest pecan tree in Travis County. The only way I could get away doing a shady as fuck shirt was to say underneath. So
I'm going to find a larger pecan tree in Texas, and then that way your shirt is fake.
it's the 18th largest pecan.
Yes, we have to figure out what's the
that you walk into and pee at an event, but a pecan, it's the 18th largest in the state.
We're gonna have to ask the mystery guest how to pronounce this word.
It is pecan.
Settle the
pecan
debate.
is a portable urinal. That's what that is.
What? You mean a porta-john?
Yeah, that's a pecan. That's what a pecan is. We've never heard of one of those, but a pecan is a tree.
So is a pecan.
No,
I actually
heard one of those.
Is a pecan or pecan a tree, or is it a
Never
nut?
heard of one of those. Never.
Okay, we got to start.
Yep. Okay. Whoa, welcome to RecLess. My name is Shane Mize. I got my two buddies here, Jay Tryon and Tom Venniro. How you doing, fellas?
Doing well.
I'm good. I don't know who the other guy is, but I'm good.
Oh, Jay Tryon. Our mystery guest, as you can see, is a great guest. I'm super excited about it. And they sent one of their things we should talk about, or things I was going to use to lead up. And I thought it was a great thing because I've never asked y'all this before either. So one of their first jobs ever was detasseling corn, which there's a farm girl right there.
What does that mean?
Just pull the hucks off the corn. We'll have to ask them. But
I've never heard the term detassel. It's just
is it like shucking? Is it
shucking corn? I guess.
Okay.
So to prime the pump, what was y'all's first ever job?
Summer camp.
You've been a rec kid your whole life, huh?
I have. That was my first job. Very plain and simple. I think I was 16. My brother was a summer camp counselor for 2 years before that. So, it was one of those, all right, I guess I'll do that. He said it sounds like a little bit of fun. You get to play all day. I was, like I said, I was 16. I remember one of the first responsibilities or jobs they gave me during their holiday week, back when that was like a big part of it, right? Themes and everything. We had a holiday week, and so they did a Christmas day at his campsite, and they had asked if I would be willing to come over and be Santa.
So were you Santa before you were the camp counselor?
I was Santa like in my second week of being a camp counselor. And they thrust me in with the oldest group. So it was really unique at the time because the first 2 years I did summer camp, I was, 16 and 17, and I think they went up to 14 years old at that time. So that was a unique experience to be, I guess, a good learning experience to be in a room with individuals who are similar in age, but having to have some kind of authority and, work in that setting in an appropriate manner.
And 20 years later, you did the COVID Santa.
That's right. I've been Santa several times. Yes, it did come full circle. And since that is a boring answer, or maybe a very obvious answer, I'll just tell you that in between there, I did, maybe my next job was working at Oak Hill Country Club. So I worked there for a little bit. And I also...
That's where they do the golf?
That is. They do the golf at Oak Hill Country Club. Yes.
The golf.
So some of our listeners may be familiar with that country club and that course. I also worked for, and I don't know, Jay, if I've ever told you this, but I worked for the Buffalo Bills for a little while when they were at St. John. Well, they're still at St. John Fisher, but I did work the Bills camp for several summers.
And it couldn't really get you over to the bright side.
It was the first year that I started was coincidentally the year that they brought Drew Bledsoe in. So at that time I was teetering. I was like, geez, maybe I am a Bills fan. but yeah, we all know how that worked out.
Do you realize how much closer of friends we would be if you were?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I mean, we still
It'd be a
talk about
two-man
football.
podcast. It'd
Yeah.
be a two-man podcast. That wouldn't even be needed.
It's possible.
Jay, what was your first ever job?
Well, mine is also in the park and rec world. So I grew up, and my parents' house happened to have a massive backyard with a baseball little league. So not that our property was massive, but literally my backyard is a 7 baseball field little league complex. So growing up, my brothers played, I played, I was there, playing t-ball. My dad was one of our coaches, but I ended up having my first job as a umpire because they were hiring kids to umpire the younger league. So I was umpiring games when I was probably 12 or 13 years old. Did that for several years, and then I also joined the grounds crew and help prep the ball fields and drag the fields and make sure that they're ready to go for night games. So always been around sports, but that was one of my very first jobs. Coincidentally, park and rec, which I really didn't realize that was going to be a thing, but it was very convenient that I could get home from school and just cut through the backyard, go to the baseball diamonds, wake up on a Saturday morning and roll out of bed and go umpire a game for, younger kids.
And Jay, I umpired as well. Not my first job, but so we have a little bit in common there. It was always something I'll hold near and dear. I always had a lot of fun being around the baseball fields. And I actually ended up doing that at a higher level. I started when I was probably 17 or so. But then after college, I started doing that for American Legion and Babe Ruth, and so traveled all around the county for about 10 years.
Look at that.
Cool.
We couldn't get away from this field if we wanted to, I guess. I'm the same way.
No.
First job was summer camp. In fact, between rec and coaching, I've never really had any job outside of that type of field. I sold shoes for like 3 months in college. I was terrible at it, at like a foot action. It's terrible. I was a community college janitor for a semester during college, just trying to make ends meet. And I was really bad at that. I was a terrible UPS. One of those guys they'd bring on seasonally and you'd just throw all the boxes. Anybody that got something broken in the early 2000s, I apologize now. I mean, I was just chunking shit over walls. That's it, man. Other than that, I've been in this field the whole time.
I wish there were ring cameras back then to see you do that, because that would have been some classic footage.
Oh, for about 6 or 8 months, I moved furniture, was terrible at that. I was bumping into people's walls as I'm bringing shit in and out. Like, this is the only thing I've ever been able to do.
I would definitely use some of that footage in a presentation of what not to do if I could get a hold of it. Also, Shane, it's interesting you sold shoes, because now, just knowing you'd be a great designer of shoes. Maybe not a salesperson.
I would enjoy that. I wouldn't. So they'd tell you, okay, if they ask you for a 10 in this $80 Nike, bring that 10 out, but bring also a 10 out in this $100 Nike. And I just couldn't do it. I'd bring out and at some point you had to, once you sold the shoes, if you sold them laces or socks, your commission went up from 3% to 5%. And I realized that if I didn't do anything at all, I could just greet people at the front. Like, I could welcome them. And then when they walked by and the other agents would attack them and try to get and if I didn't sell anything at all, they'd still give me a minimum wage. And so I literally was just greeting people, never dealing with anybody beyond that first entrance. And at some point, the manager was like, "You haven't made a sale in like a month and a half."
Why do we have you here?
I'm just greeting people. And so they asked me to leave.
Couldn't have been any worse than Tom Haverford when he worked at a shoe store. Although that means nothing to Jay.
Nothing.
I have no idea who that is.
Well, since Jay's got a heart out and I've got a great guest, I can't wait to get y'all guessing here. So, other than detasseling corn, which we can't wait to ask about, they were also the sports editor of their local hometown paper. They love to travel. I won't give away their favorite spot. That might be a round robin question. They married into a park and rec family. Their partner works in the industry, and their father-in-law was a longtime director. Do we have any guess now? Okay, just checking. They're a University of Illinois grad with a degree in leisure studies, but they started out thinking they'd be an engineer, which makes a lot of sense now that I know them. Still no guesses. Good.
I got nothing.
I've got you on full tilt here. They spent 15 years in the park and rec field. They're a regent at revenue management school. They're a board member and instructor at director school. They're a past capper visitor. And if the Midwest didn't give you a hint, they're also the founding president of the Women in Leisure Services Chicagoland chapter. Our guest is the one and only Bobbi Nance.
Welcome,
why-
Bobby.
Hey everyone.
Is this why you haven't responded to my message?
So great.
The latest one, that Midwestern in me, it's been like tearing me up, pushing you off there.
I literally sent Bobby a message last week because we talked about this in Maryland.
She
Nope.
felt so much guilt. And I was like, no, you should freaking book it. We've already done that to him once. But her Midwest sensibilities could not drag you on, unfortunately, much to what Tom and I would have loved to have seen. So
Hold on, really quick. True story. I was making my to-do list this morning and it actually says follow up with Bobbi Nance.
Well, you scratch that one off. Well, you should still follow up. But
Wait,
I'm
can
just saying.
we see that note?
Yeah, we'll
You don't-
screenshot that.
You don't believe me?
There was another name there. Is that another
Get a
name?
haircut. Find a
I
better
didn't even
job.
block. There is another name there. But yeah, I reached out to Bobby. She didn't get back to me. I'm like, Bobby just hates us.
Bobby's
No, I
busy,
really
first
just
of
love
all.
you that much, but I was like, I'm like, I don't have any more good excuses why I have to put you off, Jay. So
That's awesome.
So great. Thanks, Bobby, for being on. So when I think of the phrase, find something you're good at and figure out a way to make it something that you can do, I definitely think of Bobbi Nance. In our industry, the minutia to me that is data mining and looking at strategic, and the guys know I like to look at things like placer data and things like that, and I like to use it as a self-defense way, and I definitely try to build cases, but I do get lost sometimes in the weed in some of what now looks like maybe an engineer major would have found a great enjoyment out of at one time in their career. How did that happen for you? You're working in Parks and Rec. At some point, you're seeing that you love the data or the analytics of Parks and Rec, maybe even more than some of the programming side of Parks and Rec, and you just thought I could do this not only for my agency, but maybe be a benefit to the industry?
yeah, I think the short version is that it's never really been about the data or the analysis. It's been more just always having a really keen interest in how things work and how we can make things work better. So I didn't officially have data analysis or building dashboards or any of that kind of work in my job description until much later in my career. But when I look back at one of my first park and rec jobs, I took all the sales data that I had from my concession stand and I analyzed it against the temperature for the day and so that I could start to see.
That's interesting. That's really interesting.
So I was able to see because one of the things with the concession stand I was asked to take over was losing a lot of money, partially because of really high staffing, or it seemed like it was overstaffed. And so I sort of made an assumption that maybe if I could figure out, well, generally our sales are based off of the weather because pool attendance is based off of the weather. So if I can look at the weather forecast and figure out based off of the degrees it's forecasted to be, I can figure out actually how many staff I need and sort of at what temperature we need to bring in extra staff. And so little stuff like that I have been doing my entire career. Sort of looking back, it's so obvious, but I think, but really my first, especially really 10 years in the field were just strict recreation, programming, facility management, those sorts of things.
So there was a lot of wonder in that analytics. And I was sitting there thinking, man, I don't enjoy sometimes the analytics of the world because I'm a big wonder, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't enjoy it because I'm just not good at math. But have you done anything with the Working Genius? Do you know what your score would be? Because that was a big wondering thought of there's a problem here. How do I solve it?
Yeah, actually, I have, and it's so funny because I've done other strength-based assessments, and I feel like my answers to Working Genius were almost using the exact same language as my other one. So I love that consistency, but I'm right smack in the middle. So discernment and galvanizing.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess discerners would love the analytical side as well.
Yeah, and I think too it really plays to maybe the at least approach that I take, and why some of my work with data I think has really resonated with people is because it's not just about numbers, but it's also about, okay, and how do you make that approachable for people? How do you make that practical for people to actually use? How do you use that to actually motivate people, help them understand, like, okay, and now what do we do with it? Getting people excited about putting that in. So I feel like that sweet spot is also part of the reason I've been able to be successful with it and have had other people hopefully get interest in using data more in their jobs. It's because of that sort of unique position there with my strengths.
And just one follow up before the guys get to you. We've had some people on who've transitioned into that consulting world. I don't think a question we've asked, but something I think I would be very interested in at some point is, how scary is that? Is there a time where you're like, I have to get so many clients this year all of a sudden? Like, did you go halfway in and then jump fully in? Did you say, hey, can I do 20 hours a week and do this part-time? Or did you just say one day, I'm going to hustle for a year or two. It might be a rough year or two, but I think this is going to work.
Yeah. So I think for me with that, my I had been doing some speaking and those kinds of things for sure, and started to have an interest in working on some of those projects kind of later on in my career when I was still working for my last Park and Rec organization. My role had almost turned me into a bit of an internal consultant. So, and I definitely saw where project management and kind of helping get things started, helping, like I said, helping things work better was something that really aligned with my strengths. But the organization ultimately decided that they didn't feel comfortable, which is totally fine, but they didn't feel comfortable with me working for them and being a consultant on the side. So I had to kind of make a decision if that was a path that I wanted to go down. I had to fully make that leap, jump off that cliff.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's still a scary year or two probably until you start to really get those clients or businesses though.
I mean, in some ways, I just hit 7 years of making that decision this past week. So
Oh,
got a
congrats.
fun anniversary happening. In some ways, it's still a little scary sometimes. But obviously, I don't know. I think ultimately, part of it was that I didn't really do it because I had this desire to be a consultant. It was more, I really saw, especially with the data and strategy and evaluation and sort of innovation work that I was doing, I could really see where this was a unique way for me to help the park and rec industry. And so there are definitely people that can help the industry by what you do within your organization and being a role model, an example, being able to share that out within the industry. And then there are opportunities to work with multiple organizations as well and kind of help that way. And so I didn't really think that one way was necessarily right or wrong for me. Obviously, I'd had a lot of impact in the role that I was currently in, but knowing that that role was moving a little bit towards maintaining things and all this stuff that I had built that is not in my strengths, or it's not really where I wanted to be spending my energy. And at the time, especially, but even still now, there just are very few roles that I could have stepped into to keep progressing in that work. So this really just seemed like it was time to take a risk and have a little bit of faith in myself. But this was a way to sort of create that position where I could best use my strengths to help the industry. And it just sort of seemed like that was the way that I was going to make that happen if I wanted to keep doing this work. So sort of a pull in that direction and also a bit of a push, but yeah.
So Bobbi, we had a discussion about this exact concept that Shane mentioned, that maybe the scary part of it. Am I going to make quota? And I've been dabbling a little bit in trying to travel to a few different states and present. I got an opportunity to be in Michigan with you and Maryland, and Jay obviously was with us in Maryland as well. and you're busy. You are a busy person. We had some discussions, and you said, there was a point this year even where you were, I don't know if I'm gonna make that, but then you kind of achieved your goal and maybe even moved beyond that, where you felt pretty comfortable about where you were this year. For those individuals out there who are looking to present more and maybe just share what they have, you and people like Nile Bott, Ryan Hegrenus, your names are somewhat synonymous when you think about individuals who really do a great job of packaging their presentations, from the title to the description to the actual delivery itself. What kind of advice would you give to people who are looking to really explore or expand their horizons and give presentations? They have great knowledge, but maybe they're not as comfortable with the presenting piece. What do you do to make it so engaging, especially when you're talking about things like data, which traditionally are hard to make exciting?
Yeah, thanks. Well, first of all, the other names you listed, I'm so honored to be included among that group for sure. I think the best piece of advice that I could give people is just to figure out, like, what is it that you feel really passionate about talking about? And it doesn't have to be, if public speaking is something you want to do, Park and Rec conferences don't have to be the only place to do that, first of all. But find something that you're really passionate about speaking about. And also, the more that you can be reflective to try and learn about your own style, the better. Earlier in my career, I think I had a different sort of view of what a public speaker was, and it was someone that was very formal, and it thought back to speech classes where you sort of said, oh, this is what I'm going to present on, and then you got graded on, did you say what you said you were going to say, kind of a thing. And I actually got my sort of start in public speaking was actually speaking to high school students in driver's ed classes.
Wow.
So my brother, unfortunately, when he was 16, passed away in a car accident. And it's hard to say something good that came out of it, but one thing that was at least helpful to kind of take away from that experience is that he was able to be an organ and tissue donor, and he donated was able to make donations that benefited over 50 people through that. And that was something that my family and I just really clung to as something that we could talk sort of positively about the situation when it was a bit hard just to talk about the circumstances in general. And so we started a memorial race that was super successful. But one of the other things I did is went to driver's ed classes as those youth were about to be asked the question if they wanted to add organ donation to their license. And so it was really interesting because it was really there that I learned that I don't have to, being a public speaker isn't about giving a speech. It's about finding a way to share some information in a method that's going to resonate with your audience. And there too, I had a really clear purpose for why I was there and the change I was trying to create with them. And so that really, I think, is where I got my start, actually. I think for me, the biggest thing I can recommend is to think less about what you feel like is important to say and think more about how can I create I always talk about setting the stage. How can I set the stage, or how can I create an environment anytime I'm speaking or doing a workshop or whatever it is, where people are most likely to take away what I'm trying to have them walk away with, whether that's seeing the world in a different way, whether that's doing work in a different way, whether that's even just being motivated to or getting over a fear of trying something. Like with data, sometimes it's as simple as, I want you to not be scared to open up your Excel files and play around a bit, things like that. And so yeah, it's usually more about thinking less, or at least not starting from what is it all that I want to share, but more thinking about, okay, when they walk out of the room, and people are like buzzing, hopefully, about what they've heard, what is it that I want them to be thinking about, or talking about, or saying, here's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I love what you said about, for folks that may want to start presenting or do their first presentation, like find something that you're passionate about, because, and Tom and I have talked about this, like for several years, like the only session I ever really talked about was professional development, because that was something that's really close to my heart. I've always been focused on that. I've always want staff to focus on that. So it was like easily my first area of expertise to talk about. Now, your area, talking about data, is a little bit different because not everyone goes into a session maybe knowing what they're going to expect. What are some things that even you, who has been kind of have this market cornered, that you take away, things that you've learned at some of the other sessions that you've spoken at about data, that you've taken from other staff and attendees that have spoken up and either asked a question or been able to respond to one of your questions?
Yeah, I think if anything, it's really reinforced and sort of given me a lot more examples. It is how much people think data is about the numbers when ultimately it's really about people. So it's humans, in most cases, it's humans that are creating the data. It's humans that the data is about, or about their work, or whatever's important to them about their behavior. And then, of course, when it comes to actually using the information, it's, again, for the most part, not always, but it's humans that have to look at it. It's humans that have to interpret it. It's humans that have to figure out how it's applicable. It's humans that have to then be able to use that data to convince themselves or someone else to make those changes. And so I think, if anything, I'm always I think it's like pleasantly surprised, or it's always good to hear that still those are some of the issues, even though ultimately I think sometimes those are harder to fix than the technology issues themselves.
Before we change the subject, which I'm sure will take this conversation many directions. First of all, Bobbi attended mine and Jay's session, and that was first. I was so delighted, but it's also
Nerve-wracking.
very nerve-wracking. Yes, yes. So, but hey, she hasn't shared anything negative yet, or positive, I guess. So I guess it could go either way.
We haven't gotten the comments yet.
She's gonna use the next 45 minutes to give y'all tips on speaking. I would vote for that right now.
So that's just an aside. My actual question is, with what I'm doing right now and what many people do in trying to present and share about what they're passionate about. We all have a lot going on in our lives, and really, we talked about this, and I'd love it if you can elaborate. How do you work through the balance of that much travel, being so busy, having the desire to go to all these different places, which we already know you love to travel, and that's a big part of why I want to be doing this. Is that's a bonus, right? It's just a perk to be able to explore any destination that I happen to be fortunate enough to visit. But how do you balance that? That's been a challenge for me, to be honest. And I have littles, I have a 3 and a 2-year-old. So, my wife, she's, bless her, she's been such a rock during this kind of stretch where it's been a little busy for me, but not nearly as busy as you. How do you balance that?
Sure. Well, I think there's different seasons in my life where the amount of that, obviously, as a park and rec professional and now as a consultant, I'm definitely traveling a lot more now as a consultant. I think too, there's also at least for me, some seasons in the year. So there'll be times of year where I'm on the road a lot. And then right now I just sort of hit the tail end of the earlier conferences and those kinds of things. And as in Parks and Rec, everyone's getting a lot busier with summer activities, then a lot more of my work is shifting towards projects and Zoom calls and those kinds of things, which that makes it a little bit easier to sort of realize that there are times where this is stressful. There are times when it is not. I do try and set some, I don't want to say rules. They are rules for myself, but they're more guidelines, I guess. So I've learned definitely like how to navigate travel and those kinds of things, just trying to make some of that a bit easier for me logistically, not trying to put too much pressure on myself to get from point A to point B the quickest way possible. Sometimes that's more stressful than letting yourself spread out a bit, even though it feels like you're away for longer. If you have more time to breathe once you get to a place, that can be really helpful. I think too, I try really hard, often because travel itself can be tiring, but so can just the speaking as well.
Yeah.
So when you're trying to present and trying to give all that energy, even just that in and of itself is super energizing in the moment and for about an hour after. And then after that, you sort of crash. The adrenaline starts to leave too. So I've learned to build in sort of downtime, that I'm not going to schedule anything that's really mentally intensive or too physically intensive the day after those things. I thankfully have a really supportive spouse who understands, and we've kind of had to shift. It's been the transition there has been really interesting, shift dynamic wise with our marriage, where who's taken responsibility for what has had to change, and some of that understanding of each other has had to change. It's definitely one of those things where the balance doesn't come in the moment, but you want to make sure that the balance and the value on both ends, kind of with what you're getting out of your time away, and then what you're doing with the time that you have back at home or back at work. Both of those see a benefit, I guess,
So,
from each other.
Yeah. The
So I-
speaking is definitely draining. And just for our audience out there, I don't know if it was Michigan or Maryland, but one of those, they had you do three in a row?
I have done all day, sometimes up to four presentations, or sort of two back-to-back half-day workshops before. So yeah, sometimes it is, a full day or multiple days.
So as a WI, as we go back to working genius a little bit, sometimes Hannah will come home, my wife, and we'll vent about something, and I just immediately start to wonder, and then I try to invent and solve the problem. And it's like, I'm not necessarily asking you to solve the problem. I was just telling you about my shitty day or whatever. Do you, as an analytics person, when your husband comes home and he starts to say something, do you just immediately dive into Bobbi Nance recreation results and you start to say, well, have you looked at, the temperature of the room, or do you just, does he ever have to say, hold on a second, I'm just trying to say I had a shitty day. Does that ever happen?
100%. Although I will say that happened way before I started recreation results.
Yeah.
So who I am as a business owner, personal wise, and who I was as a park and rec professional is not that different at all.
Right. Yeah.
I have always been a problem solver. I will say that having my husband take the Strength Finders assessment and understanding his results was super eye-opening for me too. So I do definitely try and hold back,
Yeah.
but I won't say that I'm successful
That's funny.
100% of the time. I'm sure he would also agree.
Well, a DG would be that'd be the person you'd almost want to create if you were creating someone that was going to speak to people, right? I mean, a discerner that can also galvanize. That's great. Region experience and teaching experience at revenue school and at director school. Jay just is coming on to SMS school, so you can tell that they had a terrible round of applications. So maybe we can do like a promotion for them. But for those that don't know what that school is, or they're maybe intimidated by the idea, I'm not a director yet, or I'm just entry level. I don't understand how to make revenue work for me or whatever. Or maybe even Jay can speak to what they're doing at management school. What's the benefit to going to one of those schools? I'm sure there's plenty of them, but just the initial, elevator speech.
Yeah, I think it being topic intensive really gives you the chance to kind of dive in and also see the connection between different classes versus a conference where you might hit a lot of different classes.
Yeah.
But they're on such a sort of scattered or not connected. There's no thread between them. So I really like the fact that at the schools that either I've attended or taught at, there's that sort of thread, and you can see how different aspects of the profession really play off of each other. I think the biggest thing for me, though, was just the fact that you're in rooms with the same people all week long and get to interact a bit with other classes, but you really get to build relationships in a way that you just are not going to build at conferences. And so the connections you generally keep for longer, the conversations you generally have are deeper, and it just gives you that opportunity to learn a little bit more. I think for me, I also really liked as a student, actually, that the instructors were so accessible because it wasn't like they were done teaching their class and then they went on to the rest of their conference experience. So to be able to follow up and have conversations and that access to the instructors, and honestly, anytime people come up to me and are like, I went to revenue school and I remember you from however many years ago, I'm just like, yes, tell me what you need still. Like, absolutely. I feel like I'm not currently an instructor. My term is up, but I'm still an instructor in that way. Yeah. So I think all of that, it's really just the experience. I know for me, attending revenue school as a student was the first time like I could really see myself in other types of roles within Parks and Rec. So even just from a professional development and opening my eyes a bit to how the industry works in places outside. I was in Illinois, and sometimes it's great state for Parks and Recreation, but sometimes too, because there's so much good stuff happening in that state, people aren't looking outside of the state as well. And so it was a really great way to just be exposed to same problems, but sort of different settings, different challenges, different perspectives, different solutions. So.
Yeah, Bobbi, I would echo what you said about the bond that is built there when you go, because I was at director school about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that now. And, you get formed in groups and you're going to do a group project and you're going to meet people in your class from around the country. And, every time you go to a conference, whether it's a state conference or a national conference, like you're going to meet new people, but you may only see them like one time, two times for 20 minutes. You go to Ogilvy or you go to one of the schools and you're in the same classroom 10 hours a day with these same people. And there's only, 35 to 50 people in a classroom. So you built that relationship. And it's really fostered throughout the week when you're put in the same classrooms and you're meant to have conversations with the groups and you're learning from one another. So it's really unique in that, you will build something that you can't necessarily build at other gatherings. And the way the classes are structured, it's meant to be that way. You're going to learn a lot from the instructors, but it's also intended to learn from each other while you're there for the 3, 4, 5 days you're there.
I got a question. Doing what you do, as we've said, there's not a lot of people doing this in our industry. What agencies do you look at, or maybe you look outside our industry as a whole, for you to learn techniques and topics on either how people are analyzing things or how people are applying that analysis, whether it's an agency inside or maybe even that someone in the private sector that does it really well?
That's a really good question. I think I've definitely had the chance to meet both some organizations that I've worked with, but also organizations that I've heard of. Like it's always good to sort of hear what Virginia Beach, for example, has on their plate when it comes to their work with data. Some larger organizations like Minneapolis and Miami-Dade are doing well. I just got to spend some time with leaders from their organization as well at a sort of a summit around park performance, actually, somewhat recently, which was great to be invited to. I think ultimately, definitely a lot, because so much of data related things. I think one of the things I learned really quickly when I was still working in Parks and Rec, I went to a software conference for the dashboards that we used. And so that was all private sector groups that I was mostly with. And I will say that I felt super intimidated being asked to speak at that conference. And then once I heard sort of how other organizations were working, I'm like, oh yeah, it's not that different. And even though these were like major players and major companies that you'll be watching commercials of later today if you turn on your TV, kind of a thing. I think ultimately, like I said, the issues are the same. Often the scale isn't. One thing that I always try and emphasize in my work, not that I'm ever discouraging anyone from investing in any resources or technology or tools or positions related to data. All of those things are going to definitely help you. But I always try, I think I've fallen back and have found that the groups that I'm most impressed with are the stories that I think are best when it comes to using data. It's all about people that have really good questions, not people that have all the answers. Because there's all this stuff you could collect, but at the end of the day, if you don't know what to do with it, or if it's not helping you inform a strategy, if it's not helping you answer a question, then it's just more stuff that you've collected. So I've also seen a lot of success with groups that like I've worked with where we've updated spreadsheets once a quarter, but because there's a really clear strategy they're trying to inform, or there's a really clear set of questions or goals they're going after, that once a quarter spreadsheet update is just as valuable or more valuable to them than like this fancy dashboard that another organization has.
Yeah, Bobbi, I'm glad you said that because I've heard that so many times in a lot of different contexts, and especially data, but we get all this information and then we don't know what to do with it. And I'm sure you get that all the time, whether it's at a conference or a class. And it's funny, when Shane asked that question, the first agency that popped in my mind was Virginia Beach, because I remember having a conversation several years ago with Michael Kirschman, and he was talking about they were using Power BI to pull rec center visitation by zip code, and that was going to adjust their hours of operation, like using when they're getting peak time from different areas, because they might have different hours of operation by different centers based on the peak times. What if there was an agency that said to you, well, hey, we get this, we don't know how to use it. Like, is there like, first steps of like making sure you're using data to be successful? And if so, is it using specific software, or what would you recommend just to make sure they're getting the most out of what they're trying to achieve?
Yeah, so and if you've heard me present a session on data, some of this might be some of that, because I don't hide the good stuff from from anyone. I'm trying to share that out. But I think, first of all, before you jump into anything with data, I always recommend like that you understand your motivations before your metrics. So what is it that you're trying to accomplish? Where are you trying to move the needle? Where do you have questions? And then figure out what data that you need, or how you're going to measure it, or what if the data doesn't exist, is there a software program or something that could help us actually do that? I think sometimes when I work with groups, if people have a really specific problem, we can definitely tackle that. And usually what I try and do is think about not only how is the data being collected, but who, when, how often, all of those kinds of questions. So we want to look at volume. We want to look at things like the completeness of it, the accuracy of it, the cleanliness of the data, that kind of thing, and kind of work through some of those, like collecting, compiling, analyzing, and reporting is usually some of the in the weeds work that we can do. But for the bigger picture too, it's always really, I think the one thing that people forget is it doesn't stop once you've produced a report, but that you also, if you're going to take the time to make plans to improve those sort of stages of using data, you want to make sure that you're also putting in time towards the stages that have to follow after, which is discussing it, evaluating, was this what we expected to see? Wasn't it? What might we be missing? What are some of our potential unknowns, those kinds of things, as we then go to make a decision.
And I one of the last sessions I went to, one of the things that it's almost embarrassing to admit, but you had said is make sure the data is validated by frontline staff, because you may see that, potentially one round at one park is taking 30 minutes longer than it's taking at every other park. And, the leadership team will see that and we'll try to figure it out. And can we bring more resources to that park or whatever? And then you talk to the crew leader and he's like, oh yeah, well, old lady Smith likes to talk to the guys and she's always pouring them tea and they feel like they've got to do it. And that extends that park round longer. And that whole time we're trying to, examine and solve a problem in a vacuum that your frontline staff can say, oh yeah, that's exactly why. Or, we're trying to figure out, why we have a spike in something. And that's the time that the high school kids come in the morning and all shower after they've run for the cross country team before they head out to school. And so that's why, we're getting hammered at that time, even though we don't have a lot of programming that time. And if we don't talk to our frontline staff about what the data is actually saying, we're trying to solve a problem that it might not be an issue, or at least they understand why the water load's heavier at that time, even though there's no programming at 6 a.m. in the morning. But the cross country team ran for an hour in the morning and they've all run in, they're showering or whatever. And so I remember taking that away going, yeah, there's plenty of times that I look at the data and I might even talk to my leadership team and say, what's going on here? And we're never actually asking the crew leaders or the frontline staff. And so that was a great takeaway, and almost embarrassing that for some reason we in these leadership positions think we're the only people that can, evaluate this data or solve the problem.
Bobbi, let's take it back a step and just kind of, Jay asked the question about, what's a first step for someone or an agency that's looking to utilize data better. After you have that and you're realizing, yeah, there's something we need to do, we have motivation, what are some services that you can provide with Recreation Results? How can you help agencies along outside of what we already spoke about, maybe speaking and giving a one-off session at a state conference, right? There's those agencies that want to dive deeper.
Sure. Well, I think I always try the nice thing about being more of a solo entrepreneur, even though I do have a small team that I work with that helps me on projects, but we can really meet people where they're at. So if you reached out, generally when people sort of reach out and they have we know we should be better with data, but we're not sure where to start. With those groups, we usually dive into one of two paths. So if what's really important is sort of developing that vision of what it looks like for our organization to be better with data, I've actually worked with groups to create 3 to 5 year roadmaps where we do an analysis and actually ask people from a technology standpoint, from a data quality and completeness standpoint, and from a sort of individual, the human resources side of it, your people, from that side of it, and identify a bit where you're at in each of those areas and sort of what your strengths are so that we can build a roadmap that my goal in those is never to add another initiative on top of probably 20 other initiatives that you have at your organization, but instead figure out what's going on in your organization, what's already working for you, and how can we slide data into all of that. It's just like safety shouldn't be a separate thing. It should be a thing that's embedded in everything you do. Customer experience shouldn't be a separate thing. It should be embedded. I feel the same way about data and evaluation and sort of critical thinking. Another service that's really popular is doing what I call data dives, where we literally jump into one of your software programs and I will pull out data that's existing already for your organization and take it away for a little bit and work some of my analytics magic and represent it back to you. So this is really fun when it's coming out of people's registration software, for example, so that you can understand not only more about what you're offering, what you're doing, but how customers are participating, who's participating. We can give people different sales strategies, understanding about retention, or different strategies to grow retention or their overall participation or visitation to their facilities. And then have worked with groups on developing and identifying performance measures and performance measurement systems. So those people know them as something that's not just in my budget document every year that I have to fill out. Building dashboards. So after that point, it can really be a lot of fun. Even just things like updating your evaluation processes or customer surveys so that those are more streamlined. It's just anything that's going to help you get more value over all that volume that you probably have going on is really where we can help out.
Well, Bobbi, we like to do a little bit of round robin when we can at the end of these interviews, and really appreciate the time you've given us so far. If you got a couple more minutes, we'll try to get 2 or 3 rounds in here. So my first question is, what is detasseling corn?
All right. I feel like my small town neighbors are going to be really proud of me that I can still remember this. So detasseling corn has essentially what's known as like a male and female part. So 2 parts. The tassel, which is the sort of spray out of the top of with the pollen kind of out of the top of the stalk, that's the tassel. And then all the silks that are on the corn cob itself, that's really where the pollen goes. And so essentially when the tassel pollinates the silks, then that new corn that is formed takes on the characteristics of the tassel. So if you want to grow really good corn, then you can plant, what they would do is plant a row of really tall, straight corn in one row, and then every 4 rows was like good corn. So we would take all the tassels out of the good corn so that when that good corn created new seed, it would create it from the great corn.
This is
Wow.
great. We may
Science.
expand in the Midwest just with that
yes,
answer alone.
This is, that was very educational. So my first question is something that I really get joy in, and that's proving either Jay or Shane wrong. So
Not
it
gonna
doesn't
happen.
matter.
Not gonna happen.
I don't really care which one of them is wrong. I just want one of them to be wrong because they disagree on so many items.
Just a little bit.
Is it pecan or pecan?
This is simple.
I will say I say it pecan,
Woo!
but I feel like when I grew up in Southern Illinois, I might have said pecan more. It's been super interesting how within the same state, my the way I use certain words I use, my vocabulary, my pronunciations have changed a bit. But I'm in the pecan.
I love it.
Right
She's
now.
in the sphere of pecan now. There you go.
There we go. Team Shane.
Oh, we're gonna have to get a shirt next time, and I have to wear Team Shane if I keep. So we talked earlier about conferences, and Tom mentioned you came to our session, and we did not pay you to come, but you came. If you are going to a conference tomorrow, say national conference, because there's more speakers there, who are some names of people that you typically will seek out because you enjoy their sessions?
I always, the people that you mentioned, so like alongside in the beginning, like Ryan and Nile are always fantastic. I think actually lately I've been trying really hard to listen to people I haven't heard from before and actually get a bit more tactical with, or like conference sessions that are really kind of specific about something. If you do not know this about me, I am super practical. Not that I don't like planning and strategizing and those kinds of things, but then it's like, so what do we do with this? And so I wish that I could give you some good names, but I feel like I haven't heard them. I'm also looking for them, as I'm always loving to kind of hear like boots on the ground kind of things that then I can be inspired to take away. Like I just was at our Women in Leisure Services Chicago chapter, just had our full day conference on Friday. And I heard one of staff, Rachel, who from NWSRA, which is a special recreation association in Illinois. She talked about how sometimes there are park and rec organizations that are partnering with their SRAs to, when they have a special event taking place, like, hey, just an hour early or an hour after, for example, could you invite the SRA to have a portion so that, for example, your Breakfast with Santa event, you're already set up, you've already done all the decorations, you've already done all that kind of stuff. Could you just have it open for an extra hour or an hour before for specifically for us to partner with you for participants with special needs? And it helps your efficiencies, it helps you get more participants, but it helps us serve people better. So like little takeaways like that, I file away for use in the future, let it inspire me that way.
So this is the last one for me. The guys may have one more each as well, but for me, you've traveled a lot inside the United States for teaching, and there had to be some place that you went to that you either didn't know about or you had a different opinion of. What was the spot you visited when you were traveling to present or be a consultant that you were most pleasantly surprised about?
Such a good question. I feel like, let's see, I think a good example of one, because there's been a couple, is I was visiting a community in Texas, and we were doing workshops on surveying and evaluations and those kinds of things. And so one of the things that I feel like every organization has in common is that we all say that our organization is unique, but like we hear that same phrase from everybody, right. And it's totally true. So I like to ask people, what is unique about you? And the staff really spoke to their German heritage. And I was kind of like, that's super interesting. I hadn't heard that before. I can't quite picture in my head how that would play out to actually impacting the services that you offer, those kinds of things. But over the course of a couple of days and getting to go to a big special event in their community that was sort of run or organized by these German heritage groups, without knowing the name of a group, but it actually showed how that sort of leadership and that history and that tradition in the community did actually have a little bit of an influence on just sort of the way things were done in the community, or when you did things, or where you did things, or some of that. So for me, that was just such a good reminder not to have any preconceived notions about a community or their background, or sort of what those things are.
My last question, or questions, this would not be RecLess if I didn't have a two-part question. So, I want to go along the same lines as Shane. I was going in that same direction. You travel a lot. I love to travel, and I enjoy hearing when other people have great stories. So, two-part question. If you had to tell someone, you're traveling a lot, you have to try or visit this destination because it's great. It's just sightseeing, all of it. It has the whole package. Place that you would go back to over and over again. And then the second part, same question, but for food. Which city, which organization, or not organization, which city or location are you telling people this is where it's at?
I'm going to start with the second one and then go to the first one. So the second one, I know this is about travel and I'm from Chicago, but Chicago for food, I'm sorry. But I mean,
fair steak.
I think if you want like something that's just good casual, we have, our own pizza, our own hot dogs, our own all kind of different kinds of sandwiches, our own popcorn. I mean,
Ooh, Garrett's is my favorite.
Every time I'm in a Chicago airport, I'm at one of those two. What's the other one? Garrett's and
there's Nuts on Clark
Nuts
too,
on
is
Clark.
the one usually in the airport. Yeah. The fact that we have multiple places should tell you. But then when it comes to, just like amazing high level Michelin star cuisine, that's there too. So no matter what it is you're looking for. So part one, my favorite place I've ever been to, and it's not so much because it was the most epic in any one category, but it stuck with me the most, actually has been Bosnia and Herzegovina. And so it's part of former Yugoslavia, just it's a confluence of where so many different cultures and dynasties, I guess is the best way to say it, have taken over that area. So it's a really diverse area just in terms of their history. Sarajevo is a beautiful city and has just some amazing places to visit, but also, again, from a historical perspective, understanding what all has happened there has also, I think it's just really eye-opening for me. I was there during their presidential election, of which they have 3 presidents and tons of political parties, which is the exact opposite, of course, of sort of what we have in the US. So it was really interesting to reflect on completely different situation, some very similar problems. And just but also you'd probably have no idea just the amount of like beautiful and varied landscapes and waterfalls, and just, I hands down would say absolutely put it on your list.
Okay, last one. And keeping it in the Illinois theme. So last week we had a conversation with Mike McCarty, and great conversation. And, we talked about park districts and how things, obviously there's organized little differences between municipalities and park districts. I'm a big fan of following a lot of different agencies around the country on social media to kind of see what they're doing. What is, one organization in Illinois or the Chicagoland area that is doing amazing things that you would love for other people to see by following them on social media?
Oh my gosh, you're asking me to get in trouble here.
Well, and there's a bunch. See, I have family there in the Chicago area. So I go out there often. So whenever I go, I try to visit different parks and different agencies. So I'm kind of asking selfishly, but also for others, for listeners, just check out some other agencies.
Well, I mean, Glenview is a great one. I'll give a plug for the one my partner works at, which is Highland Park, and the community we're getting ready to move to very shortly. I think Northbrook is another one, kind of right in that area. There's lots of brooks, so Oak Brook
There is a lot of
also
brooks.
does a good
If you
job.
go to a brook, you're safe, right?
Or anything tree, or like, so Oak Park, for example,
There you
it is a great one as well. Former employee and resident. So again, a bit of a shameless plug, but I think some of those are ones that I've had the opportunity to either live in, work for, or work with.
Yeah.
Although that is not an exhaustive list, and don't want anyone whose community I did not name to feel less than because of that.
Well, Bobbi, that was
Cool.
great. Bobbi mentioned moving as well. She used that a
Yep.
little bit as a mechanism to hold Jay off, and she has built her day around moving our dumb podcast. Hopefully, she gets us into the teens listeners after this incredible show. So, Bobbi, thank you so much for the time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I am so glad I got the chance to do this. And it's been, I think, especially cool to do this now after having the chance over the past year and a half to get to know you all a little bit better
That's
through
awesome.
work travel too.
Yeah.
Thanks for being
Yeah,
on.
that's been great. Thanks, Bobbi.
Thanks, Bobby.
Shane, great poll. Great poll. Bobbi, over the last 2 months, has been one of those individuals that I've met that's been added to my list, and now I will cross off of my
Yeah.
list. So
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it.
So Shane, I don't know when you started reaching out to her, but I
I
reached
had
out
her
to her.
early January, so
Okay.
it was before the Maryland thing. But when you were telling us that you were looking at Maryland after the Atuya disaster or whatever,
Yes.
I was looking at the speakers and I saw Bobby's name and I said, I hope he goes to Bobby and that she's
So I
so
did.
lazy. Yeah.
And Bobby was one of the folks that I was
Sh-
aiming to have this done in person in
Yeah,
Maryland.
yeah.
Shot you
So-
down.
And then she shut me down, and then she hasn't responded to my message since. So now I know why.
She's felt
But no,
so
we-
tortured by it. I was like, don't feel tortured. Put this dude on the calendar, but she wouldn't do it.
Oh man, that's 2 times now in the last month and a half that I've been shafted.
Yeah, this has been
Feels
great. That's
great. Doesn't
really,
it,
it's
Tom?
enjoyable.
Isn't
It does.
great?
It does. This is enjoyable. Hey, this Bobbi is awesome. Bobbi, I've learned a lot about, as she alluded to when she was going. I've really enjoyed. I was able to catch a few meals with her, once with Colin Drury from my rec and once with Ryan Hegreness, and 2 amazing conversations. So to have the access to her has been wonderful, and to have her on the show even better. I want to go ahead, Shane.
No, I was just gonna say there are people in our industry. Like I would
Yeah.
love, I've said before, I'd love for Noons to read something on like revenue development and then filter it to me. Let my 8-year-old mind understand it. Same thing with Ryan Hegreness and marketing and innovation. And the same thing with Bobbi with analytics. Like I would love to just, a lifeliner where it's like, hey, this is what I'm dealing with today, and her immediately input, output it. I think she's top of our field in this. Everyone looks to her, and I was super excited to have her as a guest.
Even when she was describing the services, that's one of the great gifts she has.
Yeah.
She was describing those services that come down to a data, but at a level that I believe most people who struggle to understand data can understand. Oh, this is what you're going to come in and do.
She does a presentation for non-analytic people. It's like a analytics for dummies. Like if you see analytics on another conference session, you normally don't go to it. You're like, man, I can't sit through an hour and a half with someone giving me, but people in droves go to her because she takes the stuff that we can't understand or we don't want to put time, effort, and energy into, and she makes it so easy. 1 or 2 sentences, and you're like, yeah, I totally get it now. She's genius.
And makes it enjoyable too, because there's one thing to understand it, but it's another thing to actually like want to go and listen and enjoy, because it can't just be like, oh my gosh, another session about data. Like,
Right.
But like she's gonna make you feel like she's talking to you and really come away with takeaways, but also be very attentive the whole time.
I think it's Richard Branson that says something about the true genius is taking something difficult and making it for anyone, making it simple for anyone to understand. She obviously does that. Not only does she do that through her presentation, but how she analyzes something and then uses a chart. Like I have been super impressed at her presentations, just how easily I now understand what she's talking about from whatever. I know every time if I would have tried that, I would have chose the wrong bar chart or pie chart or whatever, but she every time chooses the right way for you to visually understand the data that she's trying to get you to understand as well. And that's the true genius, because if I have to take it to a council, I only got a couple minutes with the council before
Right.
they lose track of something on data. But if you could just show them the charts that Bobbi has and the way she's trying to explain it, it's almost like every council bit. Yep, I totally get it now. It's great.
Hey guys, I know we're gonna wrap soon. Jay, I do want to ask this question selfishly. If this podcast goes off the rail at some point, if it already hasn't,
Already.
I may just use this as an engine for me to ask people where to go eat, and this way I don't have to Google it. So I do love those questions. Obviously, our listeners probably get that by now. But Jay,
Yeah.
can you attest Chicago food? Do you
Yeah,
agree
it's very
with
good.
Bobbi? Okay.
It's very good. My brother lives in Naperville, which is a suburb about 30, 35 minutes, maybe 40 minutes west of the city. Every time we're out there, it's great. And I lived there for a short stint working for Great Lakes Naval Base and would go into the city on a regular basis, and their food is fantastic. It's a massive food scene. So it's one of those, like, you may never go to the same place twice because there's so many things to choose from. Unlike Shane, who would go to the same place and not
Every
try
single
new
time.
places.
Taste of Chicago is world famous for how incredible it is and how many
Yeah.
people get to try all that stuff. So, well, guys, I know we have a hard out. That was a lot of fun. Thanks for being on here with us. I thought Bobbi was going to be, I was super excited to have her on, but then once I found out that she had Jay on the hook, I was like, I cannot wait.
Yeah. One of these days, hopefully it happens to you guys and not just me, because that is two now between her and Atuya that, either got ghosted.
She could have
or
done you
just-
dirty. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, he did. Atuya, that was cutthroat what he pulled there, man.
We're going to have to name it pulling an Atuya from now on.
well, I was with him last week, and trust me, we were talking about it last week, and he still laughed at it.
That's funny.
So-
All right,
Good
man.
stuff, guys. Good
Have
stuff.
a good week. Thanks for being reckless, everybody. Talk to you later.
Okay. Later, guys.
Bye, everyone.